Great, it's all yours.
Group Orange, it's all yours.
Okay, so for Group Orange, we were tasked with analyzing how divine beings influence the actions of what we were reading. We were asked to compare these divine actions within the Aeneid, but also to other works and to other journeys that we had seen, and how they're the different forms of divine influences change the interactions and the things that take place. So I focused on kind of motifs that were reappearing within the Aeneid and the parallels that we saw between the first half of the Aeneid, or the first part that we read and the part that we're reading now. So one thing specifically is Venus trying to look out for the Trojans and to help. But one thing that she does a lot is she doesn't specifically act in a certain way. She goes to other divinities to ask for help. So in book 1, line 997, she's praying to Jupiter. So it says, Jupiter, she prayed, to make the laws for hosting guests, they say, grant that this day be one of joy for Tyrians and men of Troy, grant that it be remembered by our descendants. So she's trying to end the kind of the chaos that is happening, and she's trying to protect the Trojans, but doing it in a way by going through another divinity. And then we see this again in book 5, lines 1015. She says, but now, beset with worries, Venus turned to Neptune, unfolding her heart complaints and pleas. Juno's anger and her implacable heart drive me to prayers beneath my dignity. So she's again trying to protect the Trojans. Juno's causing chaos. She's angry at the Trojans and she wants to harm them. And so Venus, instead of using her own power, she's going through Neptune as a way to try and help the Trojans. And then from our reading for today, we see in book 8, she goes to her husband to get him to help the Trojans with the war that's impending. And so you see lines 990-ish in book 8. Now Venus, as a mother sorely frightened and with a good reason, moved to the menaces of the Laurentines and their hostile rising, turned to Vulcan in her bridal chamber of all gold, putting divine desire in every word she said. And then she goes on to describe everything that's happening to the Trojans and how she wants her husband to help them. Then again, we see parallels in the way that Juno acts. Juno again kind of takes advantage of other divinities in the way that she acts. So she, in the beginning, again in book 1, it's about line 89, she goes to Aeolus who's the god of wind, to capsize the ships and create a storm. And she says, Aeolus, the father of gods and men, decree and fix your power to calm. So to this King Juno now made her petition. So Juno's going to Aeolus, and she says, the race I hate is crossing the Tuscan Sea, transporting Ilium with her household gods, beaten as they are to Italy. And she said, put new fury into your winds and make the long ships founder. So she's trying to capsize the ships in order to end the Trojans and to make sure that they never make it. And then again, in book 7, we see Juno going to Alecto to try and arouse war. So this is about line 443, sorry. And it says, when she had said all of this, she dropped to earth in a shuddering wind from a dark underworld, home of the Furies. She aroused Alecto, Greece's dear mistress, with her lust for war, her angers, ambitions, and crippling crimes. So she's again taking advantage of these other gods and goddesses in order to gain benefit and to selfishly hinder the Trojans' voyage.
I compared some events in the Aeneid to its influence, the Iliad. And the first one I talked about was how in the Iliad, Apollo encourages Aeneas to challenge Achilles, to fight him, and then Aeneas gets beaten, and Apollo saves him. And that was in the Iliad, book 21. But then I connected that to how Alecto rouses Turnus to fight the Trojans in book 7. On lines 581 through 601, it's basically his plea to him to fight the Trojans. It's kind of long, but well. And then my second connection was how have both Achilles and Aeneas get new sets of armor and a shield depicting both depicting stories revolving around them, and how Thetis gets Hephaestus to make Achilles a new set of armor, and with a shield that depicts Achilles' life if he chooses not to fight, and that's in book 18 of the Iliad. And then how in the Aeneid, Venus gets Vulcan, her husband, to make a new set of armor for Aeneas, including a shield that shows the future of Rome. And the description of this shield is also kind of long, but some highlights are. Put them down. I mean, just basically their future with Caesar and is it Remus? Romulus, and how he's raised, and just basically Rome's glory at its height, and when Virgil was writing this. It has the descriptions on lines 848 to 992.
One of my points goes off of Louise's point about Venus. Primarily, like, if she wants something done, she goes to other gods for help, which is other gods also do that, like she said about Juno. But Venus's like particular way of like pleading to gods or begging to gods reminded me of Inanna or Ishtar. Whether that's because they're kind of the same type of goddess, just in different cultures, I don't know. But in Gilgamesh in Tablet 6, Ishtar gets rejected by Gilgamesh, and so her reaction is to go beg her father Anu and her mother Antum, other gods, to let her use the pool of heaven to fight back instead of like fighting back herself. And then in Descent of Inanna, not her directly, but she tells her servant Ninshubur to ask all of her like father gods for help if in the case of an emergency, and she's like planning like I'm not gonna be able to do anything, so ask these people for help. And it's it's already been called out as a similarity, but Virgil calling on the Muses in book 7, line 880, to help him like list all the kings and the troops who are gonna fight, and Homer does the same thing in book 2. Line 484 of the Iliad to start like listing the Greek army. And then they both, also in the Aeneid and the Iliad, there's like personified rivers. I don't know if they're both gods or how you categorize rivers, but in the Aeneid book 8, lines 42 through 90, it says, as Aeneas lay down upon the riverside, before him as he slept, the very god of that place, Tibernius of fair waters, like appears and helps him. He wants to, what's the quote? Relieve the burdened man, and like tell him how to find the Arcadians, and like what signs to look for. Verses in the Iliad, book 21, lines 211 through 221, when Achilles is fighting in the river Scamander, and is clogging up the river with bodies, which is a very different action than like sleeping by the river, so it makes sense that they have different reactions. But the river like asks him to stop killing people, and he doesn't, so the river fights him, and those are interactions with rivers.
Where were the rivers in this book? Sorry, I was writing down the
It's the very beginning of book 8, line 42 through 90. It just talks to him.
So some patterns that I noticed with influence from the gods is this sort of interesting way that how gods choose to use like direct influence or indirect influence, where they sort of provide the characters with the tools to make something happen. Because so when Juno wants to start the war, rather than like she does go and make Turnus angry, but she also knows that the doors that are that once they're open, the war is like officially started. She knows that she needs them to open immediately in order for this to start happening, and it's sort of an immediate thing that she wants to do, so she goes and does it herself. Whereas Venus goes and like makes armor and weapons for Aeneas, and then gives them to him. So there's just providing like tools so that he can go and fight. And I also noticed this in the Odyssey, where when something needed to be done like immediately, the gods will go and make sure that it happens. So when Odysseus is trapped on the island with Calypso, they send Hermes to just go and tell her that she needs to let him go, so that way it happens soon, so that way his journey can like continue rather than be hindered. But when he's on his journey and he's at Circe's island, Hermes simply provides him with tools so that way he can go and rescue the men himself. So sometimes when something needs to like happen immediately, the gods will just directly make something happen, where sometimes they'll just go give you tools so that way the character can do it himself as part of the journey. And I also noticed that like visual and auditory omens, like such as thunder, seem to consistently be used to sort of communicate confirmation from the gods in order to like make them go and do what it is that they need to, because when when he's talking to Evander, and Evander tells him that he needs to go find these certain people and work with them, he sort of hesitates, and on book 8, lines 709 to 711, it says, "They would have pondered long and grimly on the trials to come, had not the Cytheran queen from open heaven given a sign," and then there's thunder, and then he's like, okay, I need to go and do this now. And previously in the book, in book 2, lines 901 to 902, a character says, "Grant us a new sign and confirm this portent," and then it says the old man had barely finished when it thundered. So again, like the gods are using these signs to serve as confirmation of what they were maybe hesitant about, and then because they've confirmed it, the characters then know, okay, I need to go do this now, and then the story continues. So.
Alright, so we'll move on to group great. Our prompt was actually, it was based off of a poem, and the basic gist of that poem was that a woman, before she's married, the rights of her body and her will are not all hers. The other 2/3 of that belong to her mother and her father. And not only that, but also that is fact. That's how it should be, and that the woman should not fight that. She shouldn't try to make any difference between it. That's how it should be. And I kind of went on a little past that to say that, yeah, I in the Aeneid, I agree with that, but I also think that not only is a woman's life separated into thirds, but maybe fourths, and the fourth piece would be the will of the gods and other godlike creatures like oracles, people that can speak with gods, dreams that come to mortals by gods. And so the two prime examples of that in book 7 are when Latinus, is that right? Latinus goes to consult with his oracle, and that's on page 145, lines 96 through 101. And basically the oracle is saying that his daughter is not going to marry anyone, his daughter's going to marry a foreigner, and that foreigner is Aeneas. And also on page 144, when, let's see, so the Latinus' wife is saying that she prefers a man by the name of Turnus, who is by far the most handsome and has the highest prestige in Italy, that she wants him to marry his daughter, her daughter. But that right after line 101, it says, "But various alarming portents from heaven were proving an obstacle," which is just another addition to my point, in that it's not just the mom and the dad that are in charge of the daughter's will, And I related this back to book 1 when Dido was struck by Cupid, sent down by Venus. And not only was it willed that she marry Aeneas, but it had to be that way because of Venus, because of God's will. And so that I just definitely feel like there was a fourth piece to those thirds, and being the gods.
I took like you said, it's broken into 3 fractions. I took the mother's side, so 5:15, book 7. This is when the wife is talking to Turnus. It says, Turnus, will you allow your work to be washed away and the scepter handed to the Dardanian settlers? The king denies you the bride you won with your blood. The bride that he won is her daughter. And then 475, same book. This is when Amata, the wife, is starting to rally the Latinian? The Latinian people, more specifically the women, and it gets to the point where she says, line 475, she hid her daughter in the wooded mountains to forestall her wedding to the Tusrian? Is that
Teucrian.
Teucrian? So again, it's just showing that it's broken into 4 separate, if you're grading, 4 separate wills, and none of them are controlled by the daughter. The 4th of them is.
I got the father part from the 4 pieces, only 3 pieces. At the beginning of like book 7, Latinus consulted like an oracle, like Grace said, line 127 to 128. The oracle said that men from abroad would come and be your sons by marriage, and Latinus like took his word for it, and deciding his daughter's fate for him. And there's this part about a dowry to their son-in-law too. Like book 7, line 379. Latinus like presented Aeneas with present like a pair of moral horses to him as a dowry. And so it's like representing the part of the father and all this. And even when like war broke out, or when the queen like disagrees with him, he still holds on to his 1/3 part. That's for Aeneas to marry Lavinia.
Okay, so I have the daughter's part and Lavinius's part, and basically I think in the Iliad she kind of has no part. Like even that 1/3 is stripped away from her. I mean, you'll see that she never speaks throughout the 2 books we've read, and one of the lines that really showed, like, portrayed the fact that she has almost no say was book 7, line 364, page 205, or 205. Alright, 205. It says, keep me from pledging his daughter to a native here. Her dad says that, and there's no point, like he's just basically pledging her like one would a piece of property or something. So, and she barely appears, and her name only appears like twice, and so basically even her 1/3 of her control over her life is stripped of her in the Iliad.
Alright, we move on to group cherry.
Okay. When reading the passage where Evander kind of explains the origins of the festival, I noticed the importance that the gods play in their lives. Like in book 8, lines 267 through 268, it says, after long prayers, time brought even to us the gods' advent and aid. So they had prayed to the gods because of Caucasus, who lived in the cave above them, and Hercules appeared, and he saved them from Caucasus. And it says in lines 295 through 296, our people then saw for the first time fear in Caucasus' eyes, which shows like the power that the gods had and that they looked up to. And then lines 304 through 346 explains how Hercules did not stop until Caucasus was like completely gone, because it explains how he had been trapped in the cave, but how Hercules kept circling it, looking for an entrance, because he wanted to make sure he was completely gone. And it kind of like taught the Arcadians like to persevere and to like finish their task with certainty and to like not leave anything undone. And another point I noticed was in book 8, lines 480 through 485, it says, "In victory, Hercules bent for this lintel, and these royal rooms were grand enough for him. Friend, have the courage to care little for wealth and shape yourself, you too, to merit godhead. Do not come disdainfully into our needy home." So it shows the Arcadians' importance of having a simplistic life, and that things that are good enough for the gods are good enough for them too, and that they don't need to be needy, and that they only need to have what's necessary. They don't need extreme wealth.
Yeah, I totally agree with Kylie. I believe that the Arcadians have very strong faith with the gods, because in book 8, starting around like 253, where it says men saved from barbaric dangers in the past, it shows how the Arcadians prayed to the gods about the problem and fears of Cacus, and the gods answered their prayers by sending Hercules to slaughter and kill Cacus. So by gods, sending Hercules, it kind of restored their faith in the gods, to make their faith even more stronger. So by doing that, they celebrate the gods and celebrate Hercules. And the significance of the story for Aeneas is that it kind of foreshadows his future on the way that he could live and how his name could be immortal, such as Hercules and the other gods. So that's like, Aeneas kind of feels at home here. So, yeah.
The thing that I noted is kind of small, but it was just a tie to the Aeneid and the Epic of Gilgamesh, because in lines 273, it talks about the bull and how they were fighting the bull and how the bull was a part of it.
Where are you? In the
Book 8, line 273 is where it starts, and it talks about having to fight the bulls. And so this reminded me of Tablet 7 and the Epic of Gilgamesh, because they were fighting the Bull of Heaven and they ended up killing the Bull of Heaven. And so that's, obviously the bull is some significant animal to both of the cultures, and it carried over all the way between all these years. And then on page 239, another tie that I made between another book is I made a tie that it says on line 368, he veiled his hair and the leafy braided wreath. And so the leafy braided wreath reminded me of both earlier in this book when it mentioned the Bacchans, and when in another class I'm reading, we read Euripides' the Bacchae, and so they all had the wreaths in their hair and the crowns and stuff. And so that shows, the Bacchae was mentioned in another book. I wrote it down, but I did not write it in my notes for today. And so it shows how like different literatures feed off of each other. And so I feel like the Arcadians, I just thought they were very similar to the Iliad too, because like the sacrifices, it mentions lots of blood and having to burn like all these things that they have to put into it, and so that's been continuous throughout all of our books, and so I didn't notice anything too unique about this ceremony. So yes.
Alrighty. From any, like even outside the prompts that were given for each group, is there anything that anybody found interesting in book 7 or anything they wanted to share? Or even involving your prompt and anything you needed to say? Professor Morrell, is there anything that you wanted to add?
I want to come back to your comment, Gray, about the gods having a fourth part. I think that one can argue that they probably have a whole part in some cases.
It's like separate from the other
Well, no,
one?
that they're the ones that are controlled. It is fated for Lavinia to be the wife of Aeneas, right? And so we see how this comes about through an oracle. So Latinus receives this oracle. There are these omens, these signs. There's a battle between Turnus and Aeneas for her, so she ends up ultimately becoming the wife of Aeneas. And I think one can argue that the gods this is supposed to happen, and so there are various mechanisms through which the gods make this happen. But it does raise the question about the Catullus poem where it talks about the thirds is for the most part I think probably applies or would apply in many situations in the Roman world, right? But Lavinia and some of these characters seem to have their lives seem to be more tightly scripted, more highly influenced by the gods than others. And it begs the question, I think, for us to consider are those like an Achilles, is the degree of the influence of the gods in their lives different than it is in the lives of other people, right? Are we looking at this on a continuum? Do we have certain characters whose lives seem almost entirely scripted, or the stories about them seem to suggest that, whereas other people don't seem to have quite that, have more free reign in their free will, make decisions themselves in their lives? I think that's a question that we should contemplate. And how do we view our lives? Do we feel that our lives are in some way a function of forces beyond our control? Are we looking for the modern equivalent of oracles to help us make decisions about our lives? Do we believe that there is a mechanistic universe that is in some way directs or constrains our lives? Are we determined by our biological heritage? Is DNA charting our lives for us? I mean, I do think that it raises important questions, the character of Lavinia, about our lives and what we're supposed to do. And we've seen the Stoic response to this, right? We've seen the Epicurean response to this. We're seeing a sort of a more nuanced, a more, I don't want to say conventional, but certainly a view that we've seen in the Homeric poems and other works of literature, other philosophical things like Plato, that there are gods or forces in the universe that we represent through some sort of anthropological understanding. Anyway, just to bring that up. And to connect this to what Louise had to say about the way the gods seem to have other gods, get other gods involved in doing what they want to do. Right? I think this is a really interesting thing, and I wonder I'm just raising this for us to watch more closely whether this is gendered. Is it Juno and Venus that have to go to other gods like Aeolus and Neptune and Jupiter? And in certain circumstances, they seem to do the work themselves, like Venus goes down, well, even has Amor, right, do the work for her. And think of Juno with Alecto and all of these sorts. So is this true of the male gods as well? Do the male gods, are they as involved in this? Is there a difference? I mean, I think we should think about it and look at this. Are they as involved in this as the female gods, as Juno and Venus? Do they work indirectly as well? I think we've seen examples where Jupiter makes a decision and then sends people out there. Anyway, I think that's do we see in some respect a reflection of the Roman understanding of gendered political engagement, right? That women couldn't be generals, right? They couldn't hold offices and that sort of thing. So it was through other people, getting them to do things for them, that they were able to influence political events. Do we see that in the Aeneid? Is some way the way that Juno and Venus engage others to move events and affairs along? Is that a reflection of the political situation? I don't know. It's just something that we can think about.
You said that, and then it reminded me, our 8th colloquium of last semester, we brought up the same question, and so I was just kind of looking through my notes as you were talking, and what I noticed is that in the Iliad, how the goddesses, they had to use trickery, like they would do what they could get away with, but they weren't necessarily like in the action like the gods were, not the guys, and that Hera has like the power in the relationship with Zeus, and that they use their strengths to play off of weaknesses more in the Iliad, but here you don't even see them trying to like be tricky, be sneaky going into the action. They just know, they ask, and so that's a difference from literally the 8th colloquium last time and this time. So
well, a difference then in the vision of the poems, of the poetry, right? How they depict it. And I think but don't you think that what Dido and Juno do with Dido Venus and Juno, isn't that similarly manipulative in that respect?
I mean,
so
I don't know.
So
I feel like
Hera,
not necessarily as much as in like even here, how one of the goddesses, I guess it was Hera, probably, I do not remember, I'm sorry, but one of the goddesses wanted to go down and like ended up fighting in the war as a different person, but like these gods, you don't see them pretending to be someone else either, and so that's a difference. Like in the Iliad, it's a lot more trickery, sneaking around, than here. That's just what I noticed in the roles. I feel like the women know that they don't have as much power as the gods do, because Zeus had that intense meeting, but they still, like, Hera tried to talk against Zeus and then she got shut down, so they have some power but not as much. And here they don't try to get around it as much. I just don't feel like they try to get around it as much.
Well, no, I think that's a really interesting observation. Certainly one that we could look at empirically, right? So we do know that, for example, Hera in the seduction scene in Iliad 14, that Hera goes and gets Somnus, gets sleep to help, right? Okay, and goes to Aphrodite and says, Aphrodite, I really need to look great for my meeting with Zeus. So she gets Aphrodite's help and she gets Somnus' help, and then she goes and does this, right? And then she seduces Zeus, right? So there's both support from other gods as well as her own engagement. We don't see, it's going to be, we should look for this because we're going to see encounters between Jupiter and Juno. That the question of do the gods among themselves act and work differently than do the gods in their interactions with human beings? I think is a really interesting thing. Are there differences? Are there differences in amount? God certainly can influence human behavior. We see that with Alecto. We see that with Amor and Dido. How does that influence our sense of responsibility as human beings? So no, I think this is a really important. I think this is a key question that this raises. One last thing I wanted to come back to, and this is about the shields that Tim brought up, that we talked about the differences between these two things. The depiction, the central element in the depiction of the shield is the Battle of Actium between Augustus and Antony and Cleopatra. And this is another sort of, they envision this from the Roman perspective. It's another West versus East kind of conflict, right? But we should look too at as Professor Satterfield noted in her lecture, that Dido is in some respects this North African queen, right? And is serving sort of creates a situation that is analogous to what we see in the relationship with Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, right? That Dido and Cleopatra represent forces that could in some way sidetrack the destiny of Rome as a nation, and that both of them need to be sidelined in some way. Both of them represent forces opposed to the Roman Empire. So I do think that this is, the Battle of Actium is the central part of this is about Augustus. It's about Augustus overcoming opposition and establishing himself as the power in the Roman Empire, in the same way that Aeneas also is in the process of establishing himself as the preeminent power in his new place. One last thing, and we'll retire until Friday for our conversation, and that is I want us to think about the questions of immigration. This is a story of immigration, right? This is a story of people, the Trojans, wanting a new home, not wanting to battle, not wanting to have to fight for some place to establish themselves. They're refugees that are here, but it is ultimately the Latini, it's Turnus that depicts them as, these evil invading forces. I think it's a really interesting story for us today as we think about issues of immigration. All right, fantastic. Thanks, guys. See you on Friday. Bless you, Roma.
Thank you.
Unplug it and it's done.
Wait, did you stop the stream?